And we have such a naturalistic, prove it to me, if I don't see it, it doesn't exist viewpoint. And we forget that what is unseen.
Welcome to the Unrefined Podcast, where we unravel the mysteries of life, challenge the status quo, and explore the supernatural through a biblical perspective. I'm your host, Brandon Spain, along with Lindsy Waters and BT Wallace. We invite you to stay connected and discover how to access exclusive content by visiting unrefinedpodcast.com. Now, let's begin this week's insightful episode. All right, guys. This week we are delving into a really interesting topic, from thresholds to handbags to, and I'm not talking about Gucci, to all kinds of interesting connections in the Middle East. Have you ever had questions? Well, we're about to get into those. Our special co-host today is Jennifer Parks, and she has opened up a really amazing can of worms in her research, and it was just so good because it's a question that we've been asking for years. Maybe you've asked this question. What are the handbags? You know, we see them in the reliefs of all these ancient Near Eastern places, Mesopotamia, Samaria. We see these. And so we wanted to dive into this. And believe it or not, it has a lot to do with covenant. It has a lot to do with thresholds. So I'm going to let her get in, and we're going to grill her, obviously. No, it's a joke. We're going to let her do the talking, and then us ask questions and jump in and have just a really good conversation about the connection between the handbags and fertility, and also the threshold covenant aspect. So, Jennifer, thank you for being with us here today.
My pleasure, Brandon. My pleasure. Big fan of the show. I think you and I have been friends for a while in the social media space, but I'm really glad to be here. And I think this is a fascinating and not often talked about topic. So, do you want me to start with the handbags, or do you want?
No.
Where do you want me to start?
Let's start with the threshold stuff. And I do want to add, y'all, she is an amazing researcher. She's been doing a lot of research and giving us ideas for shows. So anyway, yeah, let's just start with the threshold. My first question is, what is a threshold and what significance it is to the biblical narrative and what we're going to talk about today?
Okay, so have you ever been at a party and somebody, or a meeting or something, and somebody says a line from a movie, everybody else laughs, they all get the joke, but you don't get it, right? And they're like, oh, okay, you smile awkwardly, and all right, sure, that's fine. And you don't understand it because you haven't seen the movie. You don't know the context of it. It's kind of the same, like 100 years from now, if we say red pill, blue pill, I say that to you now, you know it's from The Matrix. It's that super dramatic scene when Morpheus is giving Neo that choice. And so we know the context of that. But 100 years from now, are they going to know the same context? You say red pill, blue pill? Maybe not. What has happened over history is that we have lost the context for what a threshold means. We don't get the joke. We don't get the meaning of it anymore. So that is part of what I find so fascinating about this topic, and a lot of the stuff that you cover on Unrefined and that I dig into, because it gives us the context that we didn't have before. Another example, a little visual that I like to do, if you've ever seen reels or pictures of somebody, movies of somebody, an art restorer, right? And they take that painting, and they're taking that little Q-tip or that brush or something like that, and they are removing the lacquer, the dirt, the dust, and things like that that have accumulated on it. And underneath it is this amazing photo. Or amazing painting in all its glory. And that's what I like to do. I like to peel away those layers. I have a particular set of skills. I like to peel that off. So a threshold, if we think a threshold, right, it's not just that little bar that goes on the bottom of your door that you have to fix and make sure that it's weather insulated or whatever. But the threshold at that time was the whole doorway. It could be the bottom of the door. It could be a gate. It can be a portal. Also think of lintel, with the lintel on the door. That would be the top post. That would be over the door. So threshold can mean all of those things. The threshold was often a stone. You would set, when you build that house or the building or whatever, you would set that stone, and that was your cornerstone. That was what everything else was going to be measured off of, was that stone.
Threshold.
The threshold stone.
Cool.
Right.
Yeah.
So think cornerstone, the chief cornerstone, like that. Those are the right way to go there. So And also, I was stumped for a little bit because when you would read the accounts in Exodus of the Passover, he said, put it on the doorposts, which would be considered part of the threshold, and then on the lintel of your doorway. And I thought, why would you say the lintel separately? Well, lintel, where that word, it comes from Latin, and that's where we get liminal, a liminal space, an
Like
in
a liminal,
between.
yeah, I get that, yep.
Exactly. I thought that was so cool. So the lintel, everything around the door frame, holding it on there, the bottom of the door, all of those would be considered threshold. And when you hear gate, like Jesus says, I am the good shepherd, I come through the gate would be considered a threshold. So anything that's like that you would step through from one place to another comes under the broad term of threshold.
Alright, well, maybe I'm skipping and going too far ahead. If I am, you
Yeah,
can
you're
shoot me
fine.
down. But when you say this all conjures up images of me. It's me going cryptid way. How many cryptids cannot come into your house unless they have permission to come across the threshold, which you're gonna get into probably later. But there's just so many connections all around, even monster lore, so to speak,
Mhm.
of thresholds.
Permission to come through the door. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Right. Oh, that's really good. So we've lost the understanding, but we do still have that innate feeling of that threshold, that door. So if you have a pushy salesman or somebody that wants to come into your house and you're like, no, 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 and you're closing the door on them and they stick their foot in there, oh no, that is not okay.
Not at all.
They are attempting to cross the threshold when they shouldn't be. And so we have that understanding, but I'm telling you guys, there's so much more to it. It's so much deeper.
Hey, Jennifer, you're probably
Yes,
going to get into this too. I'm going to jump ahead too.
go ahead.
When I was in China years ago, let's see, it feels like I encountered this. People say the Chinese do this. I encountered it more with Tibetans when I was in Western China. And this idea of don't step on the threshold.
Yes.
So maybe you're probably going to relate to that eventually
My
anyway.
cats
Yeah.
won't do that. They jump over it. It's weird.
Maybe cats know something.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah.
Well, it's interesting you bring up China, and we'll just go to it right now. My daughter is actually in China. One of my
Mhm.
daughters is in China, and she has lived there for several years. And there's a lot of stuff that they have about the doorposts and their thresholds and that kind of thing. But
Wow.
basically, uh, we'll cover it in more detail here in just a bit. But basically, if you step on the threshold, that is you're saying you disagree with the hospitality or the covenant that's being
Mhm.
offered.
Yeah.
Another analogy, or we put it in from the Bible, would be Jesus said he was the cornerstone, but also the rock of stumbling and offense. And if you
Oh,
stumble over him, if you stumble or you trip on or you tread on that stone, you are not accepting the covenant that he's offering.
that's amazing. Wow.
I know, right? Oh man, you guys, this is so good. This is so good. There's so much good stuff here. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. So, oh yeah, another couple holdovers of the threshold that we usually have that we have is like the husband carrying the bride over the threshold on the night of their honeymoon,
Yeah.
carrying it over. That is a long standing tradition. And some of the reasons that it started was that if the husband would carry the bride over, then any entities that came with her were not allowed in. The husband has carried her over. Any bad stuff had to stay out of the house now.
Was this originated with the Hebrews? Did the Hebrews actually do this, the ancient Near East, or is it a more modern thing?
Oh, no, oh, not I wouldn't limit it to Hebrews. This goes
Okay.
all over the place,
Sumerians, Assyrians, all of them? Yeah.
all over the world. All
Okay.
over the world, all throughout time, you can find examples
Oh,
of this
even
over and
China and
over.
stuff. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh,
Wow.
yeah. Yeah, everywhere, everywhere. Okay, so the book that I was digging into is called The Threshold Covenant, and it is written by Henry Clay Trumbull, who is the great-grandfather of Elizabeth Elliot. And
It's a
I thought that was
classic.
really
Yeah.
cool. It is a classic. It is some of the words are a little antiquated and the spelling of them, but oh my gosh, there's so much in there. And it was published in 1896. His purpose for writing the book was he saw the understanding of the threshold disappearing in his time. And you think how much more we've lost over the last couple hundred years,
Yeah.
but he saw that disappearing. So he's kind of the purpose of the book is to kind of let you know what those are and to understand the importance of it. So when I say covenant, though, I want to talk about this term because sometimes we only like leave it for church or theology or something like that. But a covenant essentially is an agreement between two parties. It is usually formal, it is solemn, and sometimes even sacred. If you think about it, a covenant with the Lord. We have lots of examples in Scripture about that covenant. And an example, modern day example, of course, would be today marriage. You're making a covenant. You're in front of all these people. You've gone down an aisle through the door and all that. You've gone between something. You're making this covenant in front of everyone.
Yeah, it's good to draw a distinction between covenant and contract. A contract is in property and covenants are in people.
Yep.
I like that. That's very good. That's very good. Thank
and
you.
another interesting dimension, but I just think it bears mentioning. A lot of people don't really think about how if a man takes a wife and she's a virgin, it's a blood covenant
Yes.
in most circumstances because she's a virgin, and so therefore he goes across the threshold and a blood covenant is made that night.
Yep. Yeah.
And people don't
Absolutely.
even think about that.
Right. That's 100%, 100%. And
Yeah.
he actually goes into that a little bit in the book. And it's fascinating too, because he has a section, 2 sections that are completely in Latin. I'm like, I can't read this. And he's actually talking about that particular subject, but has it in Latin so that the people who aren't old enough and haven't learned Latin can't just stumble across it and read it. Isn't that fascinating?
There's an app for that now, though.
Yes, there is. I
Yeah.
didn't use the app, but I just skipped that bit.
You-
But
you can-
There
yes.
was something interesting when we're talking about this with medieval times. I'm researching stuff during this period, and one of the things is it was seen to be unladylike behavior for a woman to walk willingly over the threshold after marriage. So the husband carries her over. So it's like she doesn't want to be like forward or eager to consummate. And the reason is because prostitutes would lead their marks into the room. They would lead them into
Right.
right. And so to not look like a prostitute or a harlot, the woman has to show herself to be non-eager to
Mhm.
consummate the marriage.
So that would be like Jesus. He's going to carry us over the threshold, and then the divine marriage of the Lamb. And then, like the other nations of the Israels, they pulled the Israelites into the bed with them. Yeah, that's an interesting.
correct,
Wow.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to throw something out here, Jennifer, if it's okay with you. And this is addressed to BT. In occult circles, back when you were involved in that, was the threshold any mention or important in any of those type of occultic sciences?
The use of the threshold is pretty consistent throughout the occult world. One of the major things to look for is the use of something like red brick dust sprinkled in front of the entryway into a house, designed to keep witches and evil people out of your house. I mean, this is like something that's commonly probably practiced still down in New Orleans or something like that. The threshold is viewed as, in the occult world, your circle of protection. You would draw a circle of protection on the ground and nothing can cross your threshold of protection. And if you wanted something, you would summon it into its own space. That's the difference between evocation and invocation. Evoking is bringing something to a place you want it to be. Invoking is bringing it to you.
Interesting.
And so to invoke is to bring it into your space. So the vampire comes to the door and says, can I come into your house? Well, first of all, can you? Is probably the best way to respond to that. It's may I? May I come to your house? And you have to say yes or no. Well, that's invoking is to say yes, as opposed to evoking, which would be summoning a vampire to a space outside your threshold.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah, that's good. I just wanted to grab that insight there, Jennifer. If that was all right.
Absolutely.
Because it's a
And
perfect segue where you're going. So
the red dust, that's so on the mark. You can't even believe it. So we have kind of our modern view of hospitality. The ancients had a much different view of hospitality. So in a modern view, you might invite some people and go to a party. Relatives come to town. You feed them. You put them up for a few nights. You take care of them, and then they go their way. Right. And that's kind of all we think of with hospitality. In the ancient mindset, there was hospitality to an extent. In most situations, was like a covenant. So if you crossed the threshold with somebody and then you came into their home, you were in a sense forming a covenant relationship with them. You came under the roof with them, and it was kind of like your battles will become my battles. We join together. We are partners now. We'll ride at dawn to defeat the enemies, right? It was a lot like that. So it offered protection, provision, security. All of those things would be all part of the package. All part of the package.
That reminds me of church. When we
Mm,
go to church and we have a liturgy, we feast first on the Word of God, and then we feast on the body and blood in the Eucharist. So it's like we're having a covenant meal every Sunday. Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
Yeah. And that's how it is at the church I go to. The pastor views everything as that church service is a covenant renewal ceremony. That's
that's
what we're doing
cool.
there.
That's
Yeah.
really cool.
Okay, so different views of hospitality that we have there. Let's see here, and I'm trying to get to the right spot on my notes here. So, to welcome somebody into your home, you would offer a sacrifice to have them come into the home. And I'll share lots of examples about these, but basically, there's a story from 1882, and according to the Egyptian customs, there was a viceroy that was coming into his palace. A threshold sacrifice, and I'm reading directly from the book here. A threshold sacrifice was offered as his welcome. At the entrance of the palace, 6 buffaloes were slaughtered, 2 being killed just as the viceroy's carriage reached the gateway. The blood of the animals was splashed across the entrance so that the horses' hooves and wheels of the carriage passed through it. The flesh was later distributed among the poor. Essentially, if you wanted to honor someone and welcome them into your home, you made some sort of sacrifice at the threshold. The threshold is where the exchange took place. So you would do that at the threshold. And guys, there's so many examples all throughout history of making sacrifices at the threshold. The blood running down, the blood on the threshold. Sometimes both people that were entering into this covenant, they would both dip their hands in the blood and they would shake their hands and making a blood covenant there. Or they would put the handprint on the wall, on their wall outside their threshold and on the wall there to symbolize we have made this covenant.
A
We have made
remembrance.
this
Yeah.
promise together. Right, right.
Well, let me ask you this, Jennifer. We have a mezuzah. I don't know if you know what that is. We have a mezuzah
Yes.
on our doorpost, and
Yeah.
I think it's Hear, O Israel, the Shema is
Right,
in
the
it.
Shema.
And I wonder if, not necessarily in Passover times, we'll get to that later, but if later Jewish times, if they had to put blood over the law. I'm just trying, maybe I'm going too deep here, but I could kind of see a symbol that the blood supersedes the law in the sense of the law is
Mhm.
important, but you have to have the blood.
Right.
Is that, I was just brainstorming there. You think that could be a possible connection?
It could be.
It was eat the blood. You had to use the blood, and you had to eat the flesh.
Yes.
There
It
you go.
wasn't merely one thing. It was a complete, entire covenant.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And that was often with the flesh of the animal, right? They would have a feast, they might share it with the poor, but it was a part of ratifying that covenant, sitting down to eat with them. So you think about that, that's a little bit why the scribes and the Pharisees are so upset with Jesus eating with sinners and prostitutes and tax collectors,
Yeah.
because he was making a covenant with them. And then you think about his statement after that when Jesus said, well, I came for the sick. And like, this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. What did you think I'm supposed to be doing? I think that's really interesting, really interesting. And I would say, Brandon, when you're thinking about maybe you're going too deep, this threshold stuff is everywhere. I don't think you can go too deep.
Yeah.
I don't think there's just so much in here, and there's so much in this book and the footnotes, and I just want to dig into every little footnote and
Yeah.
find more, because every time you peel something away, there's something else there.
Yeah.
It's really stunning.
Jennifer, if this came to mind just as we were talking about this, you talked about how even in Trumbull's day, he felt like a lot of this threshold stuff that was starting to fade away, get forgotten. And I wonder if, I mean, I doubt it's gotten much better in our day, but I wonder what that says about how we view the home. It seems like the ancients viewed the home as a sacred space, as
Yeah.
kind of a mini temple. And I think we've lost that. And yeah, it never occurred to me the idea of hospitality. When I was in China, again, anytime we went to somebody's house, in Western culture, it's more the polite thing is you offer, hey, can I get you something to drink? It didn't feel optional in China. When I was there. It's like,
Yeah.
here's food, you're going to eat it. This is what we do.
Mhm.
You're accepting my hospitality, and then
Yeah, and don't finish it because you'll get more.
Yeah, that creates a bond between us, and yeah, it's almost like life was more covenantal back then, and I think we've lost that, and I think a lot of this threshold talk can hopefully restore some of that. I don't
Absolutely.
know.
I mean, I was always taught that the house is the first aspect of the church. You
Yeah,
have the home, and then the father is the priest of his home, and then you go up to the church you go to, and et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah,
Mhm.
that's cool.
Yeah, and we've lost that because if you don't have a father in your home,
Mm,
yeah,
yep.
yeah,
you don't have that. If
yeah,
you just move from, apartment to apartment and nobody else is there with you and you don't even have a family, that
yeah,
aspect is totally lost. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I agree. That's a good point, Lindsay. Yep. We definitely have lost that. Oh, yeah. So talking about the blood poured out, I think this is such a fascinating connection. He doesn't draw it in the book, but it's so sparked in my mind that when we say somebody's coming over, oh, let's roll out the red carpet.
Wow,
What does that
yeah,
mean? Right?
Hollywood.
Hollywood, walking on the red carpet, rolling out the
Yeah.
red carpet to welcome somebody.
Yes.
That is what it's calling back to.
That's not a
It is
stretch
calling
there.
back to those
Not at all.
sacrifices.
yeah,
No, yeah. And covenants too, this will pull back to you, BT, mentioning the red dust. A covenant for number one, making a covenant is cutting a covenant. It was called, if you make a covenant with somebody, you're cutting a covenant. That's a biblical understanding of it. And now we get that powerful imagery. Think about the covenant that I think it was the first covenant that the Lord made with Abraham, and he cut those different animals and put them on one, like a line of them on the left and a line of them, cut them in half, put half on each side, and then the Lord passed through that while Abraham fell asleep. But that was an establishing of a covenant, and he built up those animals. It's like a threshold. He created a threshold, a liminal space. I walk through this space and I'm making a covenant with you.
Yeah, typically it requires two individuals to participate in the covenant together. So you'd have in that sense, that was a very common one done between rulers or royalty, basically, when they would make a covenant between their house and another house. You would walk hand in hand down the pathway of the animals. Well, in the case with Abraham, it's only the Lord,
Yeah.
which means not only do I make this covenant with you, I am the only one responsible for if it breaks.
Yes. He made a
Isn't that
covenant with
astounding?
himself. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
And I would go so far to say this, that blood is the currency of covenants.
Mm.
mhm,
Yeah.
So
yeah,
when you mentioned, Brandon, when you mentioned that, a wedding night, that there's a blood there, that it's an establishing a covenant, 100%, 100%. And I think something there about giving birth, as a woman,
Mm.
that perspective, there's something there about a covenant being made, a covenant being
With your
created.
children. Yeah. Wow. I
Yeah,
have never thought of that. That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. So I look at blood, it says the life of something is in the blood. And
Yeah.
it seems like life is the currency that makes a covenant. So when it said Jesus shed his blood for you, that's what it's talking about. That's the context. Not just, okay, that's a little gross, but all right, I'll take it. But that's the context. I have shed for this for you. I have paid my blood as a currency for the covenant with you.
Interesting.
So yeah, the guest stepping over the blood, passing through and stepping over the threshold was saying, I accept this covenant. And then you sit down and have a meal together and you enjoy that meal. And Brandon, you were talking about saying that the home becomes like a family church, like
Yeah.
yeah,
First
okay,
form of the church.
right.
Yeah.
So what they would do after at some periods of time and in some places, instead of leaving that stone on the threshold as the threshold, got moved into the family hearth. So
mhm,
the place that everybody would gather together to do that became inside the home on the family hearth. And then that same stone, the same concept of that stone, we see it moved to other places like altars.
That's
So
amazing though. You're talking about the stone that they put above the fireplaces. And so that becomes
yeah,
the threshold. That's amazing. I always wondered why we did that.
I just had this thought. What does that say about Santa coming down the fireplace?
mhm,
Boom.
yeah,
That's an
Wow.
interesting thought. I hadn't thought about that one
No, that's
before.
great. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, so many parallels here. It's incredible.
Yeah. So another thing about the altars, and I may have added this one somewhere else in the notes, but about the altars, we just saw a little while ago Prince Charles become King Charles of England. And he sat on a stone known as the coronation stone. That coronation stone was imported, and BT seems to be nodding along, so you may know this exactly. It was believed to be the stone that Jacob put his head on when he had those dreams. And it was taken, somehow ended up in Scotland, and then the British took it, and now every king or queen that is sworn in sits on a throne that is built on top of that coronation stone.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the stone that people come in with the I don't know if it's a heresy, it's just a weird teaching of the Anglo-Israelism that the Anglos are actually a missing tribe of the Jews because of the stone. Y'all familiar with that? Y'all heard that
Yeah,
before?
I
it
haven't.
wouldn't surprise me if that were true. Yeah.
Yeah, I know it's a belief because Worldwide Church of God kind of borrowed it. He kind of
Yeah.
but yeah, I think it had something to do with that stone, and now I understand why it's a threshold stone. That makes sense. Yeah,
Yep. And it should be returned to Scotland. Just saying.
yeah, Wallace. Yeah,
Wouldn't
let's
be
hear
representing my Wallace
it.
pride if it wasn't for that. Yep. The Stone of Scone. Return to
Stone of
Scotland,
Scone.
please.
Stone of Scone. Yes. Okay. So I'm going to share some stories that we're going to kind of look all across time, history. I'm just going to pull some stories that I thought were interesting, but the book has hundreds of stories. One story myself that I experienced, I visited the Puya cliff dwellings outside Los Alamos, New Mexico. Fascinating place, and the tours are done by Puya Indians. They provide the tour. So they take you up to the top of the mesa, and on the mesa is one of their villages. They've restored part of it. They stopped in the restoration process because they found a baby's body buried underneath one of the thresholds to one of the apartments.
Mm.
And
Oh,
to
wow.
them, that body is sacred. So they're not going to do any more restoration on that part. They're just going to be content with what's already been restored and not go any further. And when I was reading through this, that would often happen. Precious things would be buried underneath the threshold. But also other things were buried underneath the threshold. For example, they would make carvings, and I believe it's carvings of the Apkallu gods, and they would put those carvings and they would bury them underneath the threshold. Or they would cut off the head of a chicken and they would bury parts of that underneath the threshold. And it was to appease the different gods that they wanted to be deities that would be guarding that house.
They were
So
inviting them in, basically, right? By burying them under the threshold.
Yes. They're saying you'll be the ones that protect us. And this holds over. I don't know, Lindsay, if you saw this, but this holds over in China today. There's red around all the doors. And so I've actually encouraged my daughter to put up a thing that's that has the Shema. Love the Lord your God with all your, put that above your door instead. But there's these red panels on there
Yeah.
that surround all the doors.
I didn't know the
And
significance, but I saw it a lot over there.
the significance is that these are the gods that are guarding our doors.
Ooh,
These are our gods. So when Israelis and modern day Jews put the mezuzah on the doorpost, I think that's a holdover from that.
yeah.
And I was telling a friend that I wanted to make like a decorative banner that would go across the lintel that would have the Shema on it and maybe some pomegranates and things like that. And I said, just to let the spiritual forces know. And she was a bit taken aback, looked at me like, oh, well, that's, you can't do that. That's like magic or a talisman or something. And I've been thinking about that for a while. And what my thought is this, that, for some reason that was really important in early spiritual days.
Sure.
For some reason, for some reason, it may not mean something to anybody else walking into my home, but it means something to the princes and powers of the air that are there. They know who this house belongs to.
I think that comes from modern, and I'm going to pick on 'em, modern evangelical Gnosticism, where we disembody our faith.
Yes.
And that's where, like, a lot of your more liturgical parts of the church are important because our faith has to be incarnated, even through worship and all that kind of stuff. So it can go to an extreme and become fetishes or magic amulets.
Mm.
But I think what you're saying is exactly right. And our modern evangelical, we're Gnostics in a lot of ways. So go ahead, BT.
Yeah, I was going to harken back to the way the Hebrew Israelites in Egypt for the last plague there, the motion given by one of the people in authority, so I'm not going to say it was the motion that was given, but when somebody splashes blood on the doorposts and the lintels, you would go down one doorpost, up the other doorpost, and across the top, forming literally a tau or a T. There is a modern representation of this that had been born out of the crucifixion of Christ, to represent literally the tau, where you would come down, back up, and across. And if you think about your body being a temple, you would start at the top of the door, which would be your head, the bottom of the door being your navel, and then across your shoulders. And then once you start looking at this sign of the cross that developed, you start seeing that the threshold covenant we have with Christ is represented by a prayer in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in a sign of a cross. And it becomes this powerful symbol, this powerful sacramental, if you will, showing which spirit is allowed to indwell the temple of our body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it tells the others. And actually, see, this is the whole thing is if we talk about something like alien abduction, someone does the sign of the cross, it shows that, there's evil entities that are repulsed by not merely the name of Christ, but by the sign of the cross.
Mhm.
So it's showing that certain thresholds are allowed, and it's the Holy Spirit, not any old spirit.
Yeah. Wow.
That's good. That's good. Another example that I thought was fascinating was the Porta del Morti in Italy. And I actually Googled this. You can find images of it today. And what it was you had your regular door, but then you had a separate door. And that separate door, the threshold was higher. So you'd have to step up to pass over that threshold. It was also thinner than your typical door. And that was for passing the dead out of the home.
Oh,
The
yeah.
threshold was
These exist in Egypt too. We call them.
Well,
we call them.
yes.
They exist in Old South houses too, you guys.
Yeah. So
Plantation
yeah,
homes. Yeah.
isn't this
Anyway,
fascinating?
yeah.
So because they didn't want to do anything to curse the regular threshold in the home, they didn't want to pass the dead over it. So they only took them in and out through this door. I also found a comment saying that if a girl wanted to marry somebody and her family didn't want her to marry them, she could sneak out through that door, but she was dead to the family
Wow.
if she snuck out through the Porta de Morte.
This is so rich. Man.
Isn't that amazing? I know, it just keeps going. It just keeps going.
Well, let's
So
keep going.
we talked a little bit about guardian deities. This is fascinating.
Mhm.
So yeah, guarding your home and like putting the Shema on the door. You guys, I really just want to do that. I want to do that at some point here. All right. So this is an annual feast to Osiris. And I'm going to read a little bit here from the book. Herodotus mentions that in the annual feast to honor the god Osiris, every Egyptian sacrifices a hog before the door of his house on the evening before the festival. Every Egyptian desired above all to be in a loving covenant with Osiris. And when he would offer a welcoming sacrifice to him, he did so before the door of his own house, as before the primitive family altar with the threshold. That is, it was blood poured out at the threshold, which was essential to the act of covenanting in this sacrifice to Osiris. I think that's fascinating. There was a Slavic feast, and I think I remember the country.
Yeah, I'm interested in that Death Week. Can you expound upon that?
Yes. So in Slavic countries, which I think is I looked it up, I didn't make a note where it was.
It's still celebrated today. You know how a lot of times in like some Roman Catholic countries, particularly in South America, they take Catholicism and then they add all their fetish stuff to
Right.
it. Well,
Right.
the Orthodox in Russia have added this Slavic stuff. Everybody does it, but it's really
Fascinating.
interesting.
So, at the annual feast known as Death Week among Slavic peoples, marking the close of winter and the beginning of spring, the peasants in rural Russia combine, and again, I'm reading exactly from the book, so if his language is a little dated or whatever, combine for a sacrifice to appease Vud Yaui, or an aroused water spirit of the thawing springs. They also prepare a sacrifice for Domovoi, or a house spirit. A fat black pig is killed and is cut into many pieces as there are residents of the place, and each resident receives a piece. and then he straightaway buries it under the doorstep at the entrance of his home. In some parts, it is said the country folk bury a few eggs underneath the threshold of the dwelling to perpetuate the house spirit.
Well, that
And
just clicks in my head about the Fabergé eggs and the Romanovs.
you're,
Yeah, I didn't think about
go
that.
on. That's
No,
fascinating.
no. I mean, it just hit my head. Like, yeah, eggs are a big deal in Russia, and they even do those little, what are those little, little dolls that you take apart? I forget what they're
Uh,
called.
but Babushka, the nesting
Babushka
dolls.
dolls, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Sorry.
No, this is like I was telling you, you can't go deep enough. You
Yeah.
cannot go deep
Well,
enough.
the egg, does fertility play into that anyway? It always does when you're talking about eggs, I would think.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, so I have a note here about the gates of an Assyrian city. So we talked about that it's the threshold, right, being the door, but also think gate, portal, anything that you're going to go through that takes you from one space to another space would be considered a threshold. So here we have the gates of a city, and you Google this and you could find images of Assyrian cities. But this particular one, each gate of an Assyrian city was dedicated to a special god and named after it, as in the gate of Bel, the gate of Beltis, the gate of Anu, and the gate of Ishtar. Remember those names. At the entrance of every gate, gigantic wing bulls with human heads stood on guard, accompanied by the winged genii. Like genie, I think. Genii would be a genie. The central doorway of the king's palace was similarly guarded. In every house, a special deity was appealed to at different portions of the doorway. And the Nagral at the top of the wall and beneath the threshold, and Mordek at the passage on the right and the left of the gate. So you can see ancient gates if you look up like ancient doorways or gates or whatever, and they might have multiple lintels and doorposts, multiple with lots of different things on them. And that was to signify these are all the different gods. These are all the different deities that we are appealing to, that we want protection from. So it's kind of like a signpost saying, hey, this is who is in charge here. Again, that thing on the doorpost saying who's in charge.
Wow.
I think that is fascinating. Let's see. Another one I have, oh, you guys, this is so crazy. Tertullian, who was a Christian father who wrote at the close of the 2nd century in warning believers against the seducements of idolatry, emphasized the clustering of deities at doors and gates of the religious in Greece and Rome. He says that among the Greeks, we read Apollo, that is at the door, and they list different ones that are at the door. But here, that would crowd there. But here's what he said that I thought was so interesting. He wrote to Christians, indeed, a Christian will not even dishonor his own gate with laurel crowns, says Tertullian, if so be he knows how many gods the devil has attached to the doors.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Wow. And we have such a naturalistic, prove it to me, if I don't see it, it doesn't exist viewpoint. And we forget that what is unseen is greater and more powerful than what is actually seen.
Yeah, or the other ditch, in my opinion, is that we only focus on the unseen and we don't see how it affects the scene.
Yeah.
I think that's what I was talking about. You know, we have a holistic faith, a body faith. God created bodies for us, and He intended us to live on this earth. And so often in certain circles, the body is just disqualified in a lot of ways, particularly in a lot of the charismatic circles I've been in the past. It's like it's the spiritual person is the one that denies the flesh, which, you know, there's a place for that. It's denying like the entity of the flesh, not necessarily the human body of the flesh. So I'm sorry, I'm harping on that. That's my
Hey, no, that's good. That because they work together, and we forget they work together.
yeah.
We see one side or the other side, and we forget they work
Well,
together.
and I'm gonna open up some can of worms here, but that's why I'm kind of sus with yoga. It's a gray area in a lot of Christian circles, but yoga, if done correctly, is worship poses, and it doesn't matter. You're worshiping Hindu gods, and anyway, so
No, I totally believe that. In fact, a little sidetrack on yoga, because I think you and I both jump on things and go with it. But one thing that I heard is that if a non-believer came to you and said, "Well, I want to take communion with you, but I don't believe," well, why would you go through the motions of taking communion if you didn't believe? It's kind of the same viewpoint of yoga. Why would you go through the motions of yoga if you're not doing something religious to honor that, because
Yeah.
that's what it was made to do.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
agree.
So,
Grab it.
yeah. So next thing I'm going to talk about is the foundations. So many foundations laid in blood, and we're going to get kind of gross here.
It's okay.
And I'll say this book was challenging for me to read. It is hard sometimes to take some of this in, to think that these things actually exist, that people could actually do these things that I'm going to talk about here. It's hard.
So
And
so
kind of gross.
I know I'm talking too much. So why do you think, this is your opinion, why do you think all this is so bloody? What is the purpose of God making this like a bloody mess? And I don't mean that in the English sense, but just a
Yeah.
bloody mess. Do you think there's a purpose in why it's so messy and bloody? Is it
I think it has something to do with that the life of something is in the blood. And I really believe that blood is the currency of making covenants and commitments like that. It has something to do with that. I don't feel like I can fully answer your question, but I think there's connections there.
Yeah, I just wonder if it has to be an image of what sin does in our lives. It's just a bloody mess, so to speak. I don't know. And it requires blood to atone and take care of the mess.
Right.
I was just
Right.
thinking that. I was wondering what you thought. So,
Yeah, I can see that. I feel like I want to think more about that idea and get back to you, kind of what I think of it. But it just makes learning about this makes our understanding of Jesus shedding his blood so much more
rich.
meaning, so much
Yes.
more significant,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Blue pill, red pill was not just a simple choice you made. It changed everything for
Yeah.
Neo in
Yeah.
that story. So,
Yeah.
all right, foundations in blood, and that's the best way to put this. In Scutari, which was modern day Turkey, you can still find this on the map. It was often the thought that if a building was falling down, if you couldn't raise that bridge, if you couldn't build that tower, the gods must not be wanting you to build that tower. We need to make a sacrifice to appease those gods.
Wow.
This is not new. This is old, and it's still going on in some places today. I'll tell you some stories here. So this story from modern day Turkey: the workmen were engaged on its fortifications for 3 years, but the walls would not stand. They then protested that the only possible way to succeed was to lay under or in them a living human being. They accordingly laid hold of a young woman who brought them their dinner and immured her, sealed her up in the walls, and she died.
An innocent, not anybody. It had to be an innocent person.
A
Right.
virgin?
Right.
A virgin,
She
maybe?
might have been.
Yeah.
Might have been. This one, and the next story here too. A story is also told among the Danes in Denmark around Copenhagen that they were trying to raise the ramparts around Copenhagen. The walls always sank, so that it was not possible to get it to stand firm. They therefore took a young, innocent girl, placed her on a chair by a table, and gave her playthings and sweetmeats. While she thus sat enjoying herself, 12 masons built an arch over her, which, when completed, they covered with earth to the sound of drums and trumpets. And by this process, the walls were made solid. I mean, to think, what mother?
Yeah.
Just reading this is so disturbing. I find it really disturbing. Then another example that I heard, and sorry, I don't remember whether it's in the book or not, but then the London Bridge, they entombed people in rooms under the London Bridge to make the London Bridge stand. And in recent excavations of the London Bridge, they actually found rooms that had bodies in them, skeletons in them. And that was
That
the London
that
Bridge.
gives a whole new meaning to London Bridge is falling down, doesn't it?
Yes, yes, yes.
Wow.
And there, well, another rabbit hole. I've heard stories about the London Bridge. You know, the London Bridge, the original one, was removed and taken to a place in Nevada,
Lake Havasu. Lake
Lake
Havasu,
Havasu, Nevada.
Arizona.
Yeah.
Oh.
Arizona. Excuse me.
Yep. Lake
Yeah.
Havasu, Arizona
Yeah.
is the
And
original London Bridge.
All right.
there's lots of.
Pourquoi? Why? I mean, let's go here. Why? What do y'all think? I mean, what's the
Well,
purpose?
I heard on another podcast, and just so y'all know, I probably put in my 10,000 hours listening to podcasts, but I heard on another podcast a man that had gone through much abuse, SRA, type of things in Lake Havasu. That area was constructed to facilitate those kind of things, and bringing the London Bridge over was part of that.
Well, Arizona is our hotspot. I mean, that's where we've actually been honing in there in Hollywood.
Ooh.
Just it's that we have our Mojave mysteries that we do. Arizona, Nevada, that whole desert area. It's if you look at ley lines, whether you buy those or not, but if you look at ley lines, that is a hub in the southwest part of the United States. Is in Arizona, New Mexico. That whole area. It's amazing. And people are attracted to it, but it's just it's amazing. And the ley lines actually extend from that hub, and they go right up Laurel Canyon, right up California. The whole
Wow.
yep. So
Well, that is interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's a sidebar. I don't know a whole lot about
yeah,
that, but I did look into that they actually
that's
have found
fascinating.
bodies
Yeah,
underneath
that's
there.
cool.
The last thing I want to say, and Lindsay, you were bringing this up about being in China. My daughter over there does some voiceover work because she speaks English, frequent fluent English speaker, and so she'll do voiceover work. And she was reading something, and it said "living pillars." She thought, oh, and she asked the person who had wanted her to work, what does this mean? Does this mean that they have plants in them, or what does this mean? She said, no, it means that bodies have been entombed in those pillars. And what they would do is entomb maybe the elderly, maybe handicapped or crippled, people like that, maybe young people. They would entomb them, encase them in the pillars. And this is an advertising point for this particular company. Come see our building. We have living pillars.
Are they alive when they entomb them, or are they dead?
They're alive,
My
hence the
goodness.
living.
I'd heard stuff about the Great Wall, like people getting kind of either their bodies thrown in dead, or sometimes they were alive. And sometimes it just sounded like well, they fell in and we got to keep working kind of thing, which is even worse. But yeah, I'd heard about that with the Great Wall, and I wonder if there wasn't some significance there too. Giant threshold.
Yeah.
That would not surprise a minute.
That in China originated in Japan. The tradition of it's a tradition of human sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll find cultures around the world that use human sacrifice for the purpose of all sorts of crazy things. Using a cripple in your human sacrifice kind of sounds like a disrespect to the gods. In my personal opinion, I mean, I'm not trying to advocate for the use of human innocence and sacrifice, of course not. But what I'm saying is, from an academic standpoint, looking at an esoteric practice, I would say, why not use an innocent? Because the gods sure seem to enjoy them a whole lot more.
Yeah.
If I go and observe Sumer, Akkad, or any of the other ancient cultures.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be, and it could be that the woman who was explaining this to my daughter was kind of softening the blow and
Oh, sure.
not
Yeah.
making it be like an innocent person, but oh, they're probably old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only that, I think it's called Hirobashira or something like that. And it's part of a specific religious practice. It's not a Buddhist tradition. It doesn't come from like Shinto in Japan. It's something completely different, which is really, really interesting to me.
More occult than religious. So
Well, more
right.
sinister forces,
Yeah.
evil sinister forces, as opposed to something that may be a little bit more streamlined or a little bit more
Mainstream.
beneficial for
Yeah.
mainstream for the culture. I mean, if I were just to examine that from an occultist point of view, this is definitely a sinister action designed by sinister forces to establish their reign.
Yeah. Wow.
Okay, so I'm going to transition a little bit. There are, like I said, there are hundreds of examples of all of these types of things.
This is the big one, though. I love
That
this one.
This
Yeah.
is a big one. So it's the Passover. So when I say Passover, as a Christian, right, we think, oh, we celebrate the Passover. That is when the angel of death passed over the homes of the Israelites and didn't kill their firstborn. He skipped them. He passed over them. Well, he puts forth a theory in here that it wasn't a Passover, but perhaps it was a crossover. So I'll read here directly from the book here. In dealing with his chosen people, God did not invent a new rite or ceremony in every stage of his progressive revelation to them, but he took a rite of which they were already familiar and gave it a new and deeper significance. And I think, because we think about that sacrifice, it just feels so weird to us right now. Like, again, it's kind of icky. It's
Yeah.
gross. It's weird. Why would God require that?
Really
But
messy.
yeah, exactly. But what he's saying in here is that it wasn't so much the angel of death did skip their homes. But what it really was is you're making the sacrifice of this lamb, Jesus being the lamb, right? That's the symbol we have. You're making the sacrifice of this perfect lamb at the door, a front door of your house, just like you do to the other gods. Now you're going to do it for me, and wait till you see what happens. So so they sacrifice that. They paint the doors. The blood would be around the door. The blood would be pouring out of the door, and that the Lord passed over their thresholds into their home with them. That's what was happening. He was establishing a covenant with them and passing over it into that home. And you guys, I read that, I put that connection together, and I can't get past the thought of putting this on your doors, and then your family is huddled in there that night, and you hear the wails and the cries
Yeah.
of people's children dying.
Yeah.
And you know that the Lord Jehovah has saved you. He has passed into you, into that presence, right? So in Revelation, he says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man opens the door, I come into him. And if you will believe in me and I believe in you, then I will come into your home and I will sup with you and I will be with you there." And so we see all those connections. The Passover is not just a nice thing we do by around Easter time. It is saying that this is the first time Jehovah said, "I want to come in. My presence will be with you in your home."
Well, and
And so now,
that's
go ahead.
soteriology too. All right. We believe in faith, then we are baptized. And what happens is we put the blood around our threshold of our heart, and guess who comes to inhabit our hearts? The Holy Spirit.
Yes, I will come in with him and sup with him and abide with him.
And
Yeah.
the whole purpose of all this is not, quote, to go to heaven. The whole purpose of this is for him to abide in us and us to become like him and have fellowship.
hmm hmm Yes. Yeah.
Total
Okay.
total different viewpoint. Yeah, I mean, it's out there, but I think that's more the gospel than what we've been preaching for all these years. It,
Yes.
transformation versus heaven, if that makes sense. So,
Mm. Right.
theosis.
It's not just a ticket to get you into the big game for
Yeah.
eternity. It's
Well,
an abundant life
it's
too.
like C.S. Lewis said, we can't handle it unless we have some transformation in our lives. Heaven will be too real.
Yeah.
Mm. Oh, that's good. Okay, so the next part that I have is kind of a vision that I had when I first started reading this. I guess a kind of a story picture. I don't know if vision's the right word for it, but envision like a woman, me on the outskirts of town in ancient times, and you would see the way they would welcome somebody great to their home is they would slaughter the animal. Well, I'm just little me. I'm in my little mud hut, and I've got a dirty floor, and I barely have a door. I have nothing to offer. I have nothing to give. So this is kind of the picture that I have. I'm just sitting there on my dirty floor by myself. And I'm going to read a little bit of this because, well, you'll see why. So in Revelation 3, Jesus says, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock." So to open the door to him is to establish a threshold with covenant with him and to provide hospitality and protection for him. We know instinctively we are destitute and utterly unable to do that. We know the great honor that we should give and that we should make a tremendous blood sacrifice at the threshold, but we have no animal worthy and we have no wine or salt. Often throughout time, it changed, it morphed a little bit. It wasn't only the blood of an animal, but it could also be represented through wine or a salt covenant. Those, because that would apply to the food, the salt in the food. Then Jesus lays down at our threshold, offering to be the sacrifice we cannot make. And then the Father comes into view. He wants to come in. He sent the Son in front of him so that the Father could enter. And my thoughts were, no, 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 don't do that. I am not worthy of such a sacrifice. So the Son is laying down. Jesus is laying down on the floor. No, I'm not worthy of such a sacrifice. I am poor, blind, and nothing. I am too small a thing for this gift, and I have nothing to give in return. But the scene plays out. The lamb, without protest, is slaughtered at the door, blood draining until the body is lifeless. In horror, what have you done? Anguish, and the entire custom is upended. I'm supposed to sacrifice to you. What shall I do now? Everything is upside down, and everyone has seen this spectacle and knows my poverty. What is to be done? Then the father steps over the threshold, over the blood of his son, over the lifeless body into my home. My poor, dirty, cluttered with sins and agonies, bereft of food, salt, and wine, and all comfort, home. And he stretches his hand down to the blood pooled at the entrance, touching it with his fingers. Dipping his fingers in the blood, he wipes the blood along the entire door frame of my home. Now the world sees my home is his home. All he has and is, he has brought with me. He stretches out his hand again for his son, and the son stands to his feet. The blood is still there, but the son is alive.
Down one doorpost, up the other, and across the mantle.
Amen. Amen.
That's amazing. I mean,
With
that's
the sign of the cross.
yep. Yeah, that's
Get around it, man. It's what's going on. It's through that door. The crucifixion of Christ is a doorway to our heart.
Yes.
and it shows
And
what's
our home.
important about the gospel. What is important about the gospel is relationship with Christ and becoming like him. Not these Western ideals that we have about heaven and hell, even though all that's important. It's a corporate eschatology, not a personal eschatology. And that personal eschatology is theosis. It's becoming like Athanasius said it. How do you word it? BT? God became man so that man maybe
Man, I'm
could
God.
become God, which people pull out of context. But he's really using that verse, partakers of the divine nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so this all fits in there, but we don't understand the Jewish context of reading, and we don't get that. A Jew would.
Yeah, God is a flag planter. He will plant flags where the enemy has taken his plans, aims, and goals, designs, twisted them, warped them, and changed them for their own sinister reasons. But he'll take something after they have done it and change it into something good.
Yeah, what was that, Lindsay? That podcast, Sword and Staff used to always say they had 3 Bs. What were they?
Blessed, it should be on your board still in there. Blessed,
Oh.
baptized, burn.
Yeah, blessed. Yeah, sorry. Yep. But that's what BT is basically saying is that we're more than conquerors, and we don't need to be afraid of evil. Evil needs to be afraid of us.
This just part of my motivation for reading this book was Vicky Joy Anderson talked about it. She said that it was one of the things that really helped her to see how much Jesus loves us, to care
Ooh,
about us.
Yeah.
I've been a Christian a long time, since I was 12. I raised in church forever. So I understand the theology. I understand this is this because it says it in the word is true. But the connection from my head, what I know in my head, to what is happening in my heart. And that all of these efforts would be done so that the God can come and dwell in my heart. And I don't have to make efforts to appease him to bring him in. He's making all the efforts to be there and to be part of my heart. And that for me just kind of upended everything. People say like this is all other religions are us trying to get to God, and here he is trying to get to us, and here's such a good example.
Yeah, I'm going to draw in some Jewish mysticism, specifically Kabbalah. There's what's known as the Sephiroth, and this is basically a 10-sphere system that is honestly designed, it depends on who you read, but it's a filtration system, so the ultimate light that comes from God is too intense for us to comprehend. And so God has made these 10 spheres so that his light can basically be filtered down into our errats down to earth. And the thing is, Jesus comes and literally is the filter by which the light of God is given to the world. Read that first chapter of the Gospel of John, and Kabbalah is basically trying to figure out how to get through the filtration system to the ultimate light of God. When he died 33 AD on a cross outside the city gates, I mean, how much more plain can you get that the filtration system is already there, and we have to, it's Jesus.
Yeah.
It's not 10 spheres of mysticism.
Yeah. To me, the difference it's made in my viewpoint of the gospel, and I'm reading a book right now by Anthony Delgado. We have really truncated the gospel, and in my opinion, right? I mean, not in a bad way. We were trying to make it easier to say, simpler to share, and this, that, and the other. But we've truncated it, and I'm like looking here, And a lot of people are out there saying, "Oh, I don't believe in any form of substitution because it's divine child abuse. The father is killing the son." But when you look at it like this, in my opinion, I don't see the son getting killed by any. I see him. I see the verse, God in Christ was reconciling the world to himself.
Mhm.
He laid down his life as a sacrifice, and it hurt the father to do what he had to do, but he had to step over the blood to get into the house for it to be a habitation and not a visitation.
Mhm. Oh, so good. So good. And if I can, I know we're gonna divert to handbags here. I'm
Absolutely.
ready in my outline to do that. But I do want to say I thought of this morning. The psalm, if you think about threshold stuff. Now, every time I read something in scripture that is a door, a gate, a threshold, something like that, I'm like, okay, take notice because it's all happening in that threshold context. How does
Yeah.
it relate and what does it do? So if you take Psalm 91, I love this one. And
Yeah.
I love Doug
Every
Van
morning.
Dorn's version that he has in his new Giants book. It is packed with threshold stuff. So if I can just read just a couple
Absolutely.
things of that. But he
Let's
says,
go.
"He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will abide in the shadow of Shaddai. God on the mountain, God of the wilderness. He will say to the Lord, You are my refuge and my fortress, my Elohim in whom I trust. For he will deliver you from the snare of the fowler and from the deadly pestilence. He will overshadow you with his wings, and his truth shall cover you with a shield. You shall not fear of the night demon, nor the arrow shooting Lilith, who shoots her arrows in the day, nor the diseased ghost that walks in darkness, nor the noonday demon. 1,000 shall fall at thy side, 10,000 at thy right, but it shall not come to you. You will only look with your eyes and see the recompense of the wicked, because you have made the Lord your dwelling place, Elyon, the Most High, who is my refuge. No evil shall be allowed to befall you, no plague come near your tent. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. You will
Hmm.
tread on the lion-headed demon, you will trample the lion and the dragon. Because he holds me fast in love, I will deliver him. I will protect him, because he knows my name. And when he calls me, I will answer him. I will be with him in trouble. I will rescue him and honor him. And with long life, I will satisfy him and show him salvation. Guys, that's all Threshold Covenant.
Absolutely.
I've
I
gone
never
to see.
saw that. I say that every morning out of the ESV. I need to do it Doug's version, but I think he got part of it from the Wycliffe. But his version is amazing. I mean, I'm gonna memorize that. That's just really cool. Yep. Stumble over a stone, and then
Yes,
Jesus is the stumbling stone. And yep,
yes.
yep.
Oh, it's all
Wow.
good. It's all good in there. All right, so shall we switch to handbags?
Yes, yes.
Handbag. All right. So here's the story that it kind of made my ears perk up. We always see in images and stuff, ancient things on the walls and stuff like that, but you'll see an image and they're holding this little bag, this little square shaped or rectangular shaped bag. Like, what is with the bag? And it's not lipstick. What do you got in that bag there?
Not
And so,
Gucci.
not Gucci, not a Gucci one. So this, I perked up when I was reading this here, and this is talking about temple thresholds in the Americas. So how the same threshold things would be done at temples. So the altar or the stone of sacrifice, right? It goes from threshold to the family hearth to an altar where sacrifices would be made on that altar. So, reading from the book here, among the Philippines, a Mayan people in Central America, there were two principal and very solemn sacrifices, one at the commencement of summer and the other at the beginning of winter. Little boys, from 6 to 12 years old, were the victims of the sacrifice. At the sound of trumpets and drums, which assembled the people, 4 priests came out of the temple with braziers of coals on which incense was burning. And after various ceremonies and religious exercises, they proceeded to the house of the high priest near the temple and took from it the boy victim of the sacrifice. He was then conducted 4 times around the court of the temple with dancing and singing. When this ceremony was finished, the high priest came out of his house, and with the second priest and his major domo, they proceeded to the temple steps, accompanied by the principal men of the locality, who, however, stopped at the threshold of the temple. Then there were 4 priests. The 4 priests seized the victim by his extremities, and the major domo, coming out with little bells on his wrists and ankles, opened the left breast of the boy, tore out his heart, and handed it to the high priest, who put it in a little embroidered purse, which he closed. The blood of the victim was received by the priest in a vessel made of a gourd and was then sprinkled on the direction of the 4 cardinal points. Then the heart in its purse was put back in the victim of the boy, and the body itself was interred inside the temple. This sacrifice at the threshold altar was performed at the threshold, or the beginning of each of the 2 chief seasons of the years. So one thing that I just thought of yesterday, going over this again, the little bells on their wrists and ankles, it makes me think of that verse in Isaiah 3, where he's talking about the women walk around with the tinkling bells on their hands and feet. I just wonder if there's a connection there. I'll report back later if I find it. But putting the heart into a purse, and even though here he puts it back in, like, this is the first time I've ever heard any mention of a purse, a bag, or something like that. And I just can't help but think there's some power associated with that purse, or some power of having the blood in that bag.
Now, which culture did that story come from?
That is the Mayan people.
The Mayan people.
The Mayan people. The Philippines. And I do have there's footnotes for all these in the book, but some of the ancient things that you're trying to find sometimes aren't there.
Mhm.
So it's a little bit of a digging process. But yeah. So all right, that's my thing. And then I found that article that I sent to you, Brandon. And I have to admit, when I first pulled it up, it was talking about the ancient bags and possible connections. And I'm like, oh, wow. And then I look at the article, TLDR, too long, didn't read. I just handed it off to you. So I'm curious to see what you thought. And yeah.
Well, I don't want to go into the whole depth of it, but it draws a lot dealing with palm trees and dates, because if you notice in some of those reliefs, which a relief, you guys out there, is basically a carving that's on a wall that's on there. If you don't know what a relief is, in a lot of those reliefs, you'll see a picture of them with a bag, but they'll also have what they call a pine cone, which is still relevant. But the guy that I was reading, a scholar was saying that he thinks that it's dates, and it has to do with a date tree and palm tree. Well, the interesting thing about all that is there's total symbolism about that, but the bag is supposedly holding pollen
Mhm.
to fertilize the date tree, because the date tree is interesting. It has a male and a female flower, and it cannot self-pollinate itself. It has to be pollinated by something else, which what pollinates things? I mean, what are we running out in the world right now? And people are really
Bees,
afraid, and they
yeah.
need to be. Honeybees.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the bee was like the fertility type symbol that would take the male pollen to the female ovum. And
Yeah.
the other interesting thing about this, and this is where it fits in with the whole threshold covenant, this is why I wanted to bring this up, is the palm trees first were welcomed Jesus into. There's a good chance, not 100%, but there's a really good chance that those were date palms when they, Hosanna in the highest, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And
Mhm.
they're all over the place I think they come from Iraq originally, but they're all over the place in the Middle East. And like, they were used to make different temples. The date tree, or the palm tree, the date tree was so essential to what they're saying. But this is what was fascinating. This guy wrote this. He said, further, we cannot overlook the clear importance of the date palm in the Christian and Judaic ceremonies of Passover, most notably Palm Sunday. And he says, for instance, in Poland, which has no palm trees, is recreated as part of the Christian tradition, and it commemorates the day when Jesus rode in to Jerusalem, and people greeted him by waving palm fronds and saying, Hosanna. Anyway, I just thought it was really interesting when I was studying through this, and he's talking about bees. And I mean, there's all kinds of interesting stuff. The Old Testament scriptures talk about honey all over the place. There's Isaiah passages calling the Assyrians, talking about bees. The big thing I thought was really interesting, and I never ever noticed this, is the Pharaoh, obviously on their tombs, but their head coverings with the stripes look like bees.
Mhm.
I've never seen that. I mean, I just thought it was, hey, it's cool. They're doing stripes, and it looked like bees. And so this guy who went to this museum, and it had all these Sumerian and different reliefs all over the walls. He asked, it's kind of an interesting story. He asked the guy that was doing a tour about that. So what are the handbags? He said, "Oh, that's easy." And he thought he was going to get rebuffed by him. And he said, "That's easy. It's a pollen bag. It pollinates the dates, and it's a fertility thing." And then the guy said, "So what is the pine cone?" He said, "Well, that's a date." Anyway, it just made me start thinking. I used to always think that the tree of life in the Garden of Eden was a pomegranate because pomegranates are all over the temple and all over the place. But going back and looking at ancient Near Eastern countries that are around it, particularly there's this relief from Nineveh. It's called the Adam and Eve seal. It has them sitting, and in the middle of it is a date tree, a date palm with the snake underneath it. And so there's just a lot of, and it ties into the whole threshold thing, through the palm trees and the palm and that kind of stuff.
That's a really interesting idea because a lot of traditions show that it's a fig tree, not to countermand what you found,
Mm-hmm.
because fig trees have been shown the leaves cause skin irritation.
Mm.
And so it's kind of like there's this all sorts of like they make leaves out of a fig tree. And it's like, well, maybe it was the fig tree that was the fruit. There are some species of fig that require a wasp to pollinate it.
Mm.
The wasp has to climb in. I don't know if you guys know this, but figs are really inverted flowers.
Yes.
And so this wasp has to go inside the fig. Well, it can't get back out. And what happens is literally, so basically figs are not vegan, first of all. Throw that one out there. But anyways, it takes literally the innocent sacrifice of another creature to make it into the fruit so that it can have seeds.
Fascinating.
You're,
So
you're making me question liking fig Newtons. I just
they're not vegan.
Well, fig Newtons probably, and this is a long rabbit trail, probably aren't figs either. Anyway, so
Yeah, right, exactly.
Not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore. It could be this, BT, to kind of like rectify that inconsistency there. It could be that the tree of life was figs, but the tree of knowledge of good and evil were dates. Because in this relief, the snake is there, and he was there at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, not at the tree of life.
Yeah, imagine.
Yeah.
Imagine what it was that they took that would cause skin irritation to the point God's like, no, I'm going to have to go ahead and slay an innocent, probably a lamb or a sheep or something, and give you guys clothing because this is, no.
Yeah.
We're not going to let you run around with eczema your entire existence.
Yeah.
Well, and in the article, you talked a lot about, honey and the prominence of honey and everything. And
Yep.
I don't
Land
know
of
why I
milk and
never
honey.
thought of
Yep.
it. The land of milk and honey.
Yeah.
I don't know why, it
First
just
thing
mean
Jesus ate when he at the resurrection was honey. Yeah, it's crazy.
wow.
Yeah, it's
It
crazy.
is. It
Yeah.
is.
And so you could kind of piece that in with the whole threshold thing. But I saw that, and somewhere in the article, I can't seem to locate it right now, but it talks about the whole concept of the threshold. And the Apkallu were known as protective gods, protective spirits, which I found that really interesting in this, and that goes back to the whole threshold thing of these entities were probably some of the household gods, like you said, that were buried underneath the threshold too. It's just amazing. It's just, there's so many different connections. A person could probably write a doctoral dissertation on this and not even scratch the surface of all this combining together.
I think
It would be an amazing book,
Yeah.
Jen.
Yeah.
Not saying you need to write the book or anything, right?
Yeah.
No.
No hint. No hint.
Did I just get voluntold?
Voluntold. Yeah.
No, there's all sorts of really weird stuff with that. The idea with the handbags and pollen and then a date being used.
Yeah.
If you think about the idea that something like date palms may in fact require human engagement, right? Like, could you imagine fleets of farmers having to actually go through and, okay, we're going to take all the pollen off of these male trees and put them into the female trees. And a date's a really good resource to do that. Dates are naturally sticky. So, I mean, could you just imagine you're just taking this and you're like, I got some pollen and I'm going to put it over there, pollen here, pollen there. And you're just doing this instead of requiring bees specific. You become the bee, kind of,
Right.
and you are the pollinator. You are the agriculturalist. You are the high society now that you are the manipulator of creation. And it leads to some ideas like something like corn. I mean, corn itself requires so much human interaction to just propagate it that it's like you're not going to get that naturally occurring. You don't need bees to pollinate corn. You shake the stuff and it pollinates itself and you get corn.
Mhm.
So it's just this idea that man becomes the new gods is part of the idea behind being that which pollinates. You are the bee, you are the gods.
Like you have the power.
You have the
You
power
have
over
the power.
creation now.
Yeah.
That's a good segue into La Venta Monument 19 and the feathered serpent.
Yeah. Yep.
Since you mentioned corn,
Yeah.
and she mentioned the embroidered bag being used in the sacrifices. So yeah, Monument 19 and the Olmec archaeological site.
It's unfortunate that Christianity came into Central South America and put an end to the brutal sacrifice. I mean, here comes the far
Yeah.
right stopping our.
How could they do that?
Well, let me it really blow something away. It was something I was thinking about this morning when I was going back through this material again. Is I'm going to metaphor this even further and take this whole bag and pollen and date to an example of discipleship and evangelism. Y'all know I have to go here, but it is also an image of us taking the seed, the pollen out to the world to pollinate the seeds. We can't make anything grow. All we can do is pollinate things. And so we pollinate other people into the kingdom, and the Holy Spirit is the one that makes the growth. And so I saw a
Yeah,
huge
that's
connection
good.
there.
I mean, how many of us carry our Bible in a bag to church?
I don't.
Some of us bring it in an embroidered bag.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I have a leather killer. Anyway,
It's the only heart I'd carry in a bag. Just saying.
yeah. So what tribe was that, Jen, that did the heart in the was it
Um,
Mayan?
yeah, it was a Mayan tribe, but just so you're aware, the different tribes and the different cultures very small pockets of intense one. It's like you have a vast city, but it has all these different, all tons of different tribes, like as populous as neighborhoods.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
the Mayan peoples, they're the best way to describe the Mayan peoples would probably be a comparison with Europe, like a European nation. It wasn't simply they weren't all just French. They were all
right.
sorts of they were a tossed salad of peoples. And it's important to note that the religion was vastly different. It wasn't merely just the one type of this human sacrifice. The indigenous peoples of Mexico didn't participate in human sacrifices. They had completely different views, and that should be really drawn out that the Mexica were not the same as the brutal
Right, right. My
people of the
my
Maya.
mom was a missionary in Guatemala for years, and it's akin to, I mean, like seeing neighborhoods. Like I'm here in Denver, and you got the big Metro Denver area, but it's all they're so isolated due to the terrain and everything that was there that you would have like one tribe that would dress one way, they would have their own language, they would have their own traditions and their own food. They might have some stuff they picked up from other people, but essentially, like this is it, and that's the tribe. So it's if you just say Maya, that includes a lot of different
Oh, yeah.
things. But he has here the Pili, Pipiles, Piles, I guess. And I have a reference book for it, but it's Ravel's Natural Religion of Mexico and Peru.
Mm.
It's in that book, which I'm sure is quite old.
So did the different, and I'm going to use it's not pejorative, but a term that's become pejorative. The different ghettos in these towns, did they all speak Mayan? Was Mayan a common language, and they spoke that, or were they have different dialects, or what? I'm just curious.
I would say I'd probably refer to it more as tribes. Like think of it as a tribe. And
Right.
some of them in Guatemala, the tribes would have their own language. My mom worked in Neiba, Guatemala, and they speak Neiba there. And
Yeah.
if you go to a different town, 20 minutes away by ride on a bus, they speak a different language and they wear different clothes.
Yeah, the
And they
prevalence of
know.
a trade language is an archaeological historical fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What language was the New Testament written in?
Greek. So it's
Even though a lot of the world spoke Latin.
Yes.
lingua franca, right?
So
Isn't
it's
that the
kind of
terminology for it?
exactly.
Yeah.
It's simply what it is. You know, by the time that Jesus was around, Hebrew was pretty much just
Mhm.
spoken in the temple,
Mhm.
maybe sometimes in the synagogues, sometimes read off a scroll. And then the idea is that, you know, the trade languages become Greek or Latin, English.
Aramaic. I mean, is Aramaic close enough to Hebrew that they could understand the Hebrew and Aramaic, or is it
I
pretty
wouldn't be
different?
surprised.
Yeah.
An Aramaic scholar could probably say yes or no to that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah, so
fascinating.
to tack onto what BT's saying, so a lot of the men would be able to speak Spanish, but most of the women wouldn't. They'd only
Yeah.
speak the language of their tribe,
Yeah.
their group. So
There's some Nahua speaking groups down around the Maya too. It was like
That's
some
another
group.
that's
Yeah,
another common language than a
there's a
holy
few that
language.
made their way down to the more Maya speaking areas.
So,
So
all
yeah,
right, let's open up another can of worms and we can wrap up. But I just want to go here. See, I just want opinions. What you guys think about this? Since there's such a proliferation of handbags and all these different cultures. All right, here's the $10,000 question: How? How are all these different cultures from China to to Peru and even the Samoan Islands, Easter Island, Hawaii, the
Yeah.
Maori people?
Mhm.
How did this work? I
I
mean,
will speak archaeologically, anthropologically. I'll give you the science answer.
all right, I want to hear from
Creating,
everybody.
yeah, creating a bag is the easiest thing you can do. Crafting a bag doesn't take a whole lot of anything. Leaves have been used to turn into a bowl, into a bag to carry things. Making bowls, making bags is, like I said, one of the simplest things that cultures can do. It comes before pottery, it comes before the wheel, it comes before language. It doesn't take a whole lot of effort to take your cupped hands and visualize that there's something similar to that in nature
Mm.
to help you carry fruits, nuts, berries, etc., from one place to the other. So,
Mhm.
speaking, in a anthropological way, it's a cultural development to produce carrying one thing to another place.
hmm
I mean, just think about when you're a kid picking berries or something like that. How many of us have used our shirt to
Right.
Oh,
pile
still
fruit
do.
into? You
Yep.
pull your shirt up and you make a bag.
But I guess so. I agree with you there. That's a good point, BT. My question would be, why would it be included in these reliefs?
Right. Yes,
Why?
that's the $1,000 question.
What's
Yeah.
the significance there? And if it's pollen, just kind of reducto ad absurdum, if it's pollen that's in there, then they're saying like we control life. We are life
hmm
givers. We are life
Yeah.
bringers. We have the power.
Yes.
Um, I
Right.
I'm not totally satisfied with that answer. I feel like
Yeah.
I want to learn more about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
hmm
Lindsay, what do you think?
Well, you mentioned the Maori, their story of baskets, bags,
Yeah,
whatever you want to call
I'm
them,
glad you're bringing this up. Yeah, go here.
is that this sort of cultural hero named Tane, and I'm pronouncing it wrong. Let me get that out of the way. But anyway, Tane goes up to the heavens to their supreme being. One of the names I heard from him was Io or something like that, to get these 3 baskets from him called Kate, I think. And the baskets, one of them has good, beneficial things for mankind in it. The other one has evil things for mankind in it. And then there's one devoted just to rituals, prayers, just religious life, cult in the original sense of the word life.
Right.
Um, and he goes up there, and this sort of evil trickster figure named Wiro doesn't want him to do this, so sends birds and insects after him. The wind god comes and helps him and pushes them away. And he brings these baskets back down, and then I think later creates mankind and gives them these gifts. So we got this the gods, one Prometheus type figure going up and getting these goodies for mankind and bringing them back down.
Yeah,
And
that's shared a lot through a lot of other cultures, right? I mean,
yeah,
there's
Yeah.
the Ute people of the Uinta Basin. They
mhm,
share a story where Coyote was responsible for the creation of all the peoples of the world because he got into the Creator God's bag
mhm,
and was looking for
Wow.
the goods, and all he was doing was kicking out this thing and that thing, and there's the European, there's the
yeah.
Asian, there's the and he just, but that's Coyote though, right?
Mm.
But yeah, Levinta Monument 19 has this figure sitting on a big feathered serpent, and he's holding a little bag. And I've heard people say that it could have been, the Olmec. We don't even know who they are. We don't know what language they spoke. They could have been Maya, but I think most of the Mayan speakers who were in that area later, probably came from the south. But we don't know. They have this figure of this guy associated with the feathered serpent holding a little bag, and there's a story. We talked about it on the feathered serpent episode of Quetzalcoatl going down to Mictlan, the underworld, and getting the giant bones. And the gods, he kind of tricks the gods into getting them, and they get mad about that, and they send birds to attack him and make him drop them so they break, so that people are imperfect because of that. But anyway, I thought about that when I read and I wonder if, in a way, it almost ties in with just pollination, just this seeding mankind and things like that, and
Yeah.
still fertility. So I wonder if that couldn't be one explanation of them too. But yeah,
Or it could be, Lindsay, I think just going back to the Enochian type worldview
yeah,
or it, it's the watchers that are bringing down the hidden knowledge,
hmm
all the
Yeah.
stuff, easily applying to that,
yeah,
pollinating. They were metaphorically pollinating
yeah,
humanity with their sciences. All the I forget what
hmm
Gary Wayne says. He says it's like the liberal arts is what we call them in college, but all the different sciences,
hmm
knowledge, like you said, the Promethean type analogy. I
yeah,
find it interesting too that it was feathered too, because Prometheus. No, that was sorry. I got my that it was Icarius that flew to the sun. And
Icarus, yeah,
okay, all right, I got them mixed up. Sorry, I get my gods mixed up. But yeah, but I think there's a real possibility it goes along with the Enochian. Some of the stuff I researched always said that the Bible always copied the ancient Near Eastern stuff. I think that's too black and white. I think it's
yeah,
a give and take. I think they all borrowed from each other.
But you mentioned, like in the Book of Enoch, where they teach them all these things. One of the things they taught the women how to apply cosmetics. So
mm,
then it might actually be a makeup bag. I
yeah,
don't know. Just a thought.
yeah.
It's not makeup, it's Maybelline.
When I researched this, I started getting handbag ads like crazy. I don't want to buy a Gucci handbag here.
Want a Gucci?
I'd rather
Oh,
have a
that's so interesting. I feel like there's a lot more here.
oh, yeah,
Mm,
totally. Absolutely.
Haven't unlocked the key yet. Haven't figured that out
Absolutely.
yet. Yeah.
I think this is a good place to end, and as we research more, we may possibly do a part 2 down the road.
If you don't mind, I'd just like to mention kind of my other little
Yeah.
hobby thing that I do.
Yep.
I run a book club called the Gritty Ladies Book Club, Scratching Beneath the Surface. And we actually read through Threshold Covenants. We meet weekly on Zoom, and it's for ladies. We read and we chat, and it's I tell them it's not the sip and mimosa by the pools with your girlfriends. We dig down, we share stories, we learn,
You go
it's
deep.
it's really
Yeah.
good stuff. Yeah, we go
Yeah.
deep. We go deep, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Sandy
But
said it was real deep.
good. I'm glad.
No, she liked it. Well, she's used to me. I mean, I talk absurd stuff. Well, not absurd, just crazy stuff sometimes. And I'll come up with weird theories and bounce it off of her. She's like, you're nuts. Anyways. But thank you so much, Jen,
Yeah.
for coming on here and co-hosting with us.
Gosh, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. This is great fun, and I love to be able to talk about it. My husband thinks I'm a little crazy too. So.
Yeah. That's all right. They'll all find out one day.
That's right.
But I've definitely taken the red pill. Thanks for listening and supporting us. And remember, stay naturally supernatural.